I arrived at the venue for my son's event at 5:45 p.m. and froze when I saw the iron gate locked with a heavy chain. "I'm sorry," the manager said. "This event was canceled 3 days ago. 2 weeks earlier in that same hall, I had helped my son arrange the seating chart, flowers, lighting, and 200-person guest list." Then he laughed in front of his fiancée. "My mother didn't even finish college. She's only good at counting forks and arranging tables." He expected me to break in shame, but those 200 guests weren't coming only for him. "Thank you for being here with me. Before we begin, drop a quick comment. What are you doing while you listen? Working, driving, cooking, or taking a quiet moment? Your voice means more than you realize." Quick note: some details have been adjusted for storytelling. What truly matters is the lesson at the heart of this story. At 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning in November, a phone call taught me that the most devastating betrayals arrive with polite efficiency and perfect professional courtesy. My name is Edith Lockwood, and at 68, I learned that a phone call at dawn can rewrite everything you thought you understood about your only child. The ringtone cut through the November darkness like a blade. I was already awake, sitting at my kitchen table in Boston with my first cup of coffee, watching the sky lighten over the harbor. When you have worked in event coordination for 40 years, your body learns to wake before the crisis calls arrive. This morning, it arrived exactly on schedule. "Mrs. Lockwood, this is Conrad Hartley from Thornfield Estate." Conrad Hartley, 45, had managed venue operations at Thornfield Estate for 12 years, long enough to know when a call like this one should never have been necessary. His voice carried the careful neutrality of a man who understood he was about to deliver news that would require documentation. "Good morning, Conrad," I said. My hand was steady on the coffee cup. "What can I do for you?" "I'm calling to confirm the cancellation per our standard protocol," he said. "The Farrell corporate event scheduled for this evening." The coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. "I'm sorry," I said very slowly. "Did you say cancellation?" There was a pause. Professional measured the kind of silence that follows when someone realizes they are standing in the middle of something they do not understand. "Yes, ma'am," Conrad said. "The event booked under Farrell Consulting. 6 o'clock reception, 200 guests. We processed the cancellation request and issued the refund according to the 72-hour clause. I'm calling to ensure you received the confirmation email." I set the coffee cup down, placed it precisely in the center of the saucer. The small ceramic click was the only sound in my kitchen. "When exactly was the cancellation executed, Conrad?" Another pause. Shorter this time. I heard the faint sound of keyboard keys in the background. "Tuesday afternoon, 6:47 p.m., he said. "The contract holder, Mr. Clayton Farrell, authorized it electronically. Standard digital signature protocol." Tuesday. 3 days ago. I had been sitting in a hospital room on Tuesday afternoon holding my best friend's hand while the doctors discussed treatment options for her pneumonia. My phone had been turned off for 6 hours, by hospital policy, by necessity, by the basic human agreement that some moments require you to be unreachable. My son had known exactly where I was. "And the refund destination?" I asked. "Return to the business account on file," Conrad said. "Farrell Consulting, LLC. Processing time is 5 to 7 business days." "Thank you, Conrad," I said. My voice sounded calm, measured, perfectly ordinary. "I apologize for the confusion. There must have been a communication breakdown on our end." "No apology necessary, Mrs. Lockwood," he said, and I could hear the relief in his voice. "These things happen. I hope the event reschedules smoothly." I thanked him again and ended the call. Then I sat in my kitchen for exactly 30 seconds listening to the silence. The November sun was rising over Boston Harbor, painting the kitchen walls in cold gold light. My coffee had gone lukewarm. Outside, the city was waking up cars, starting doors, closing the ordinary rhythm of a Saturday morning in a neighborhood where people still read the newspaper on their front steps. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf in the corner of my kitchen, the one that held cookbooks and reference binders and the accumulated paperwork of a long professional life. On the second shelf from the bottom spine, facing inward so the label was invisible, sat a forest green binder I had not opened in 3 years. I pulled it down and carried it back to the kitchen table. The cover was plain, no title, no decoration, just a thick 3-ring binder with reinforced edges and tab dividers inside the kind you buy at an office supply store when you need something that will last decades. I had spent 40 years making sure nobody ever saw the seams. Today someone would see them, just not the person my son expected. I opened the binder. The first page was a handwritten index entries logged in black ink, each one dated and cross-referenced. Names, titles, organization cities, contact information updated annually in the margins. Notes in shorthand only I could read: preferences, family details, professional milestones, the small human facts that transform a business card into a relationship. You need to understand something about the hospitality industry. We keep records the way generals keep battle maps. Every event is a campaign. Every guest list is intelligence. Every successfully executed evening is a tactical victory that someone somewhere will remember when they need a room set up on impossible notice or a crisis managed with invisible efficiency. For 40 years, I had been the person they called. Governors and CEOs, philanthropists and venture capitalists, the managing partners of law firms that billed 4 figures an hour, the foundation directors who move millions with a single signature, the corporate executives who could greenlight a product launch or kill a competitor's funding round with one phone call. Every single one of them had stood in a room I built and said the same thing: if you ever need anything, just call. I turned to the first tab section, Executive Tier Northeast Corridor. The pages were dense with entries, margin notes climbing up the sides in different ink colors, marking different years. 643 names. 643 people who owed me the kind of debt that never appears on a balance sheet. 3 days ago, I said aloud to my empty kitchen, while I was sitting in a hospital room holding my best friend's hand. My son had canceled the event, his wedding reception, though he had been calling it a corporate networking opportunity for months without telling me. He had timed it for the exact window when he knew I would be unreachable. He had processed the refund back to his business account, the same account I had wired $340,000 into 2 years ago when he said his consulting firm needed bridge capital. He had in every measurable way erased me from his life with the clinical efficiency of a man closing a redundant vendor contract. 643 names, I said. 40 years of rooms I set up for other people. I opened the ledger to the first tabbed section and ran my finger down the first page. My son had no idea this book existed. He was about to learn what 40 years of showing up actually builds. The first name in the ledger was written in handwriting younger than the last, and the 40 years between them held everything my son had never bothered to ask about. I turned to the opening page dated March 1977, my 22nd birthday, and traced the first entry with my fingertip. The ink had faded to sepia, but the words were still legible. Richard Caldwell, Managing Partner, Caldwell and Associates. Below it, in smaller script, remembers his wife's coffee order, prefers corner tables, tipped the coat check girl $50 when his firm went public. I had been a banquet server at the Harrington Center that year, 22 years old and terrified of every polished surface in that building. Richard Caldwell had been the first person to learn my name to ask it twice, so he would remember. 15 years later, when I applied for Director of Events at the Ritz-Carlton, Boston, he made a phone call on my behalf. I got the position in 1995. He never mentioned the call. I never forgot it. The ledger pages progressed in chronological order, ink colors shifting as pens wore out and were replaced, blue to black to blue again. The handwriting matured steadier, more confident, but the structure never changed. Name, title, organization. 3 details that mattered. 1 note about what made them human. Edmund used to say, "You don't collect business cards, Edith. You collect people who remember what you did when nobody was watching." My husband had understood what I was building long before I did. He had been a high school history teacher, patient and methodical, the kind of man who marked papers at the kitchen table every Sunday night for 33 years without complaint. When I worked late coordinating galas and product launches and fundraising dinners, he left dinner wrapped in foil on the counter with heating instructions written on a Post-it note. When I got promoted, he bought champagne. When I got screamed at by a CEO whose seating chart I'd corrected, he listened without offering solutions I didn't need. He had a stroke in 2015 when I was 60, died 6 weeks later in a hospice room that smelled like industrial disinfectant and cut flowers. I kept working for 3 more years after that, not because I needed the paycheck, but because stopping felt like admitting the desk and the phone calls and the meticulously formatted spreadsheets had been for something other than the life we were supposed to build together. I retired at 65 in 2020 on a Tuesday afternoon in March and walked out of the Ritz-Carlton carrying a cardboard box containing a coffee mug, a framed photo of Edmund, and the green binder nobody had ever asked about. Clayton visited my office exactly twice in 40 years. Once when he was 12, bored during a school holiday, sitting in the corner, playing a handheld video game while I finalized a seating chart for 300 venture capitalists. Once when he was 26, asking if I knew anyone in private equity who might be interested in his consulting startup pitch deck. He never asked what the green binder on my shelf contained. He never asked how I knew the people whose names I handed him on business cards pulled from memory. He never asked what it meant to spend 4 decades showing up to rooms where your job was to be invisible until something went wrong. If you've ever built something over decades only to watch someone take credit in a single conversation, you know the specific silence that follows. It is not loud, it is not dramatic. It is the sound of a door closing on the assumption that your child sees you as anything other than a resource to be activated when convenient. I closed the ledger and set it on the kitchen table. Then I stood and walked to the window overlooking the harbor. 3 days ago, Tuesday, November 15th, I had spent the afternoon at Massachusetts General Hospital. Helen Marsh, my best friend for 32 years and a retired ICU nurse, lay in a bed on the 4th floor looking smaller than I had ever seen her. Pneumonia. Serious enough to require IV antibiotics and oxygen monitoring. Serious enough that when she asked me to stay, I turned my phone to silent, buried it in my purse, and sat in the chair beside her bed for 6 hours. "You're the only person who shows up," Helen had said, her voice thin and hoarse. I stayed until visiting hours ended at 7 o'clock. When I got home that evening, I made tea, checked my phone, and saw 3 new emails. A confirmation from my dental office about next week's cleaning. A newsletter from the Boston Public Library. A promotional offer from a kitchen supply store. Nothing from Clayton. Nothing from Thornfield Estate. Nothing flagged urgent. I had assumed foolishly in retrospect that silence meant normalcy. That if something significant had changed, someone would have called. That the event scheduled for this Saturday evening, the wedding reception my son had been planning for 8 months, was proceeding exactly as outlined in the contracts I had reviewed and the timelines I had helped him build. It was only now, standing in my kitchen with Conrad Hartley's words still echoing in my head, that I understood the precision involved. Clayton had executed the cancellation at 2:47 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon. Exactly the window when he knew I would be unreachable. He knew I turned my phone off in hospitals. I had told him that years ago after sitting through a memorial service where someone's ringtone interrupted the eulogy. He knew Helen had been admitted on Monday because I had mentioned it during our last phone call. He knew I would stay as long as visiting hours allowed because that is what I do. What I have always done, the basic arithmetic of showing up when someone needs you. How many times can a mother forgive being erased before erasure becomes permission? I checked my phone at 7:15 p.m. that Tuesday night and saw nothing unusual because Clayton had designed the absence to be invisible. No urgent subject lines, no flagged priority emails, just the clean efficiency of a man who understood that the most effective betrayals are the ones that leave no trail of panic, only the slow-growing realization that you were deliberately kept in the dark. He had known exactly where I would be that afternoon. He had known I wouldn't check my phone. He had known I would trust him. But there was one thing Clayton didn't know. I had spent 40 years learning how to rebuild a room in less time than it takes most people to notice it's gone. But before I could rebuild anything, I needed to remember exactly what Clayton had torn down. 2 weeks before my son canceled the venue, he stood in that same building and delivered a performance he'd rehearsed with his wife the night before, and I didn't know it yet. It was early November, a Thursday afternoon technical site visit at Thornfield Estate. I had driven out to Greenwich at Clayton's request to help finalize the room layout for what he kept calling his wedding reception, but kept structuring like a corporate fundraising event. The grand hall was empty, except for the 4 of us, Me, Clayton, his fiancée Saskia, and Conrad Hartley doing his final walkthrough inspection. Clayton Farrell, 40 years old, stood at the center of the polished marble floor with the posture of a man who'd learned to command a room before he'd ever learned to build anything inside one. Tall, precisely groomed, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had Edmund's height and my cheekbones, but the expression, that careful, practiced charm, was entirely his own construction. Saskia Farrell, 35, moved through the grand hall like she was touring her own gallery, opening every gesture calibrated for an audience that didn't exist yet. She was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful, deliberate, maintained, requiring constant investment to sustain the illusion of effortlessness. I was standing near the southeast corner measuring sight lines from the entrance to the head table when Clayton walked over with Saskia at his elbow. "You know, Mother," he said, his voice carrying across the empty hall with perfect clarity, "when Saskia walks into a room, people see a VIP guest. When you walk into a room, they mistake you for the catering staff." I looked up from my notebook. Saskia smiled. It was the kind of smile that belongs in photographs, not conversations. "I think what Clayton means," she said, her voice light and poisoned, "is that you have a very service-oriented presence." Conrad Hartley, standing 20 feet away pretending to inspect the curtain rigging, went very still. I saw his shoulders tighten. He'd worked with me on a dozen events over the years, had watched me coordinate galas for senators and product launches for Fortune 500 executives. He knew exactly what I was capable of. He also knew what he was witnessing. I wrote down the centerpiece dimensions in my notebook. My handwriting didn't waver. "The floral budget needs to be adjusted," I said. "These tables won't support anything over 18 inches without compromising the sightlines to the stage." Clayton laughed. It was a practice sound, the kind that's designed to invite others to join in. "Don't try to lecture me on business metrics, Mother," he said. "You never even finished college." I closed my notebook and looked at him for 5 full seconds. Then I looked at Saskia. Then I looked at Conrad, who had turned away, completely, his jaw tight. You need to understand something. When someone practices cruelty the night before they deliver it, they've already decided you're not worth the truth. The insults were too polished. The timing was too smooth. Saskia's follow-up line had arrived on cue like a scripted response. They had rehearsed this, probably over wine at their apartment, probably laughing. I finished the site visit, logged every measurement, confirmed the timeline, drove home in silence. 2 weeks later, Clayton canceled the venue while I sat unreachable in a hospital room. But that humiliation public calculated witnessed was not the first time Clayton had underestimated what I knew and what I'd prepared for. 2 years earlier, in September 2021, Clayton had arrived at my apartment carrying a leather portfolio and a business plan. I had been retired for just over a year. The days felt long and shapeless without the structure of event deadlines and crisis calls. Edmund had been gone for 6 years. The apartment was clean and quiet and suffocatingly empty. Clayton sat across from me at the dining room table and presented his pitch, Farrell Consulting Group, strategic advisory services for distressed tech startups. He needed capital to launch. He needed it from me. "How much?" I asked. $340,000, he said. No hesitation. He'd practiced this number. I asked 7 questions. Rigorous ones. The kind I'd heard venture capitalists ask at fundraising dinners where I'd coordinated the catering while they negotiated million-dollar deals. "What's your projected operational runway with this capital injection?" 18 months, he said. "What's your client acquisition timeline?" "First 3 clients signed within 90 days. Pipeline to profitability by month 6. Who holds secondary liability if the firm's cash flow turns negative in year 1. He blinked, paused, recovered. "The operating agreement assigns liability to the primary stakeholder," he said. Me. I asked 4 more questions. He answered adequately. Not brilliantly, but adequately. The business plan was competent. The projections were optimistic, but not delusional. He had clearly done his homework. I wired him the money the next morning, my entire life savings. Every dollar Edmund and I had accumulated over 33 years of marriage. Every paycheck I'd saved during my final 3 years of work. the retirement account I'd planned to live on for the next 20 years. But before I transferred a single cent, I did one thing Clayton dismissed as unnecessary. I insisted on a signed promissory note. "Mom, this is just a little family seed money," he said, impatient, already mentally spending it. "Do we really need all this legal paperwork?" "Yes," I said. I had the document drafted by Helen Marsh's estate attorney. Standard terms: 17% annual interest. Full repayment due within 5 years, or upon business sale, whichever came first. Clayton signed it without reading the fine print the way people sign documents when they believe the relationship supersedes the contract. The irony was so sharp it could have drawn blood. He was using my money to build a firm on the backs of my contacts, and he thought I was too stupid to notice. I kept one copy for myself, not because I didn't trust him, because 40 years had taught me that the most important documents are the ones nobody remembers you have. I slid my copy of the promissory note into the locked drawer of my desk, right next to the updated copy of my will I'd executed 2 months earlier. Clayton thought he was getting a gift. He had no idea he'd just signed a contract with a woman who'd spent 4 decades making sure every detail was documented before the doors opened. Documentation was only useful if you knew what you were documenting. Clayton didn't. 1 month after I wired him my entire life savings, Clayton invited me to tour his new executive office, and I walked into a room decorated with photographs of events I had personally built 15 years before he ever thought about starting a business. It was October 2021, a crisp Tuesday afternoon in downtown Boston. The office was small but expensively furnished, glass desk, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district. Saskia had clearly supervised the design. Everything was curated for the photograph the client meeting the impression of success that precedes actual success. 3 large framed photographs hung on the wall behind his desk, black and white, museum-quality matting, professionally lit events captured at their peak moment of orchestrated elegance. I recognized 2 of them immediately. The first was a corporate gala I had directed in 2008 for a pharmaceutical company's product launch. 500 guests, 3-course plated dinner, live orchestra. The photograph showed the ballroom from the mezzanine-level chandeliers reflected in polished marble, every table setting aligned with geometric precision. The second was a charity fundraiser from 2012. I had coordinated it for a cancer research foundation. The photo captured the moment during the live auction when a tech CEO bid $2 million for a vintage car. You could see the entire room in the shot, every guest focused on the stage, the energy perfectly calibrated between excitement and decorum. I had built both of those rooms. I had hired the florists, negotiated with the venues, managed the timelines, resolved the crises that always arrived 90 minutes before doors opened. I had stood in the back corner of both events, making sure nobody saw the machinery that made the magic possible. And now they hung on my son's wall like trophies he'd earned. "These are beautiful event photos, Clayton," I said. My voice was steady, interested, casual. "Where did you find them?" "Trade magazines, estate sales, online auctions," he said, glancing at them with the pride of someone who believes curation equals creation. Saskia helped me curate them. They set the right tone for client meetings, shows we understand high-level event execution. I nodded and turned my attention to his desk. Sitting in a lucite business card holder was a premium card with embossed lettering, "Vincent Russo, Managing Director, Russo Capital Partners." I recognized that card immediately. I had set up Vincent Russo's first investor dinner in 2006 at the Four Seasons. He'd been a junior partner, then nervous about whether the entree choice would offend his managing director. I'd spent 20 minutes on the phone with him the day before the event, walking him through the menu options, reassuring him that details mattered, but anxiety didn't. 15 years later, he ran a private equity firm that managed $800 million in assets. He didn't know he was doing business with my son. He knew Clayton as a consulting contact, a name someone had probably mentioned in passing at a networking event. Clayton had no idea the referral chain led back to a woman who'd once calmed Vincent's nerves over a phone call about salmon versus beef. Watching your child build a career on the bones of your legacy while insisting he excavated them himself is a very specific kind of haunting. "The office looks wonderful," I said. You've made excellent progress." Clayton smiled. Saskia, standing near the window with her phone in her hand, smiled too. Neither of them saw what I saw, but someone else did. 13 months later, at Thanksgiving dinner in 2022, Ira Townsend looked at me across a table laden with food neither of us would remember eating, and I watched him do the math in real time. Ira Townsend, 65, sat at the head of his daughter's dining table with the steady composure of a man who'd spent 40 years managing trust accounts and could smell creative accounting from across a dining room. Silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of understated wealth that comes from never needing to prove it. He had built his career on identifying discrepancies between what people said and what the numbers showed. We were seated in the Farrell's high-end kitchen, the kind with marble countertops and professional-grade appliances that cost more than most people's cars. Saskia had cooked, or more accurately had catered and plated, a Thanksgiving dinner that belonged in a lifestyle magazine. 10 courses, wine pairings, ambient lighting that made everything look like it was already being photographed. Saskia was in the middle of her third glass of wine and her second monologue about Clayton's business acumen. "Clayton built this entire firm completely from scratch, Dad." She said, her voice bright with the conviction of someone who'd never had to build anything from scratch in her life. "Pure self-reliance. It's really inspiring." Ira set down his fork and looked at me. "Your mother must be incredibly proud," he said. His tone was even professional, the kind of neutral statement that's actually a question. "Edith, did you assist with the capital launch?" I opened my mouth to answer. Clayton spoke first. "Mom helped out with some basic event logistics," he said, waving a hand in a gesture that managed to be both dismissive and patronizing. "She's got a knack for minor details like that, introductions, venue recommendations. But the real work, the strategy, the client acquisition, the financial architecture, that was all ground-up development." If you've ever been erased from your own story while sitting at the dinner table where it happened, you know the exact temperature of the silence that follows. It's not hot, it's not cold. It's the airless vacuum of a lie so casual that nobody thinks to question it, except the person who just watched their entire professional legacy get reduced to minor details. Ira looked at Clayton, then he looked at Saskia, then he looked back at me. He held my gaze for 3 full seconds. I didn't say anything, I didn't correct the record. I didn't stand up and recite the exact dollar amount I'd wired, or list the names of the contacts Clayton had inherited without knowing they came from me. I just looked back at Ira with the calm, measured expression of a woman who'd spent 40 years watching people lie to themselves about how rooms get built. Ira's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, with recognition. He knew. He knew the way accountants know when someone's hiding assets, the way auditors know when the quarterly report doesn't match the spending patterns, the way people who work with numbers for a living know when the story being told and the data supporting it exist in 2 different universes. Ira Townsend looked at me like a man who knew the numbers didn't add up. Some people see discrepancies and say nothing. Others see them and start documenting evidence. Ira was the latter. But he wasn't the only witness I had. I learned the cruelty was rehearsed the morning after it happened when Gwendolyn called me from her car with the kind of quiet, controlled fury that only comes from witnessing something you can't unsee. Gwendolyn Mercer, 52, had been my assistant for 15 years at the Ritz-Carlton, and she'd learned from me that the most important conversations happen in the booths nobody thinks you're sitting in. She called at 7 in the morning, the day after the Thornfield site visit. I was still sitting at my kitchen table, staring at my notebook, where I'd logged the table dimensions without letting my handwriting shake. "Edith," she said, her voice tight, "I need to tell you something and you're not going to like it." "Go ahead." "I was at Morrison's last Thursday night, that upscale place in Back Bay. I was seated in the booth directly behind Clayton and Saskia. They didn't see me." I closed my eyes. "What did you hear?" "Everything," Gwendolyn said. "They were workshopping what to say to you at the site visit. Saskia had her phone out with notes. Clayton was typing lines into his phone." She paused. I heard her take a breath. Saskia said, and I'm quoting, "When Saskia walks in, she's a VIP. When your mother walks in, she looks like catering staff. Write that down." Clayton typed it word for word. Then she said, "Make sure you mention the college degree part. That's the line that will really hit home." I didn't say anything. "Edith, they workshopped your humiliation like a presentation slide." He typed it into his phone while she watched. They were laughing. I thanked Gwendolyn, told her I appreciated the information, hung up and sat in my kitchen staring at the green binder on my table. The insults I'd absorbed at Thornfield hadn't been spontaneous anger. They'd been focus grouped, rehearsed, polished for maximum impact. Clayton had practiced comparing me to catering staff the way other people practice wedding toasts. If someone you love has ever practiced hurting you the night before, they did it, the specific kind of cold that settles into your bones when you learn about it later. It's not the heat of betrayal, it's the ice of premeditation. But that wasn't the worst of what I learned in the weeks leading up to that Saturday morning phone call. 2 months earlier, September 2023, 8 weeks before the event, Clayton would eventually cancel. I met Ellis Hampton at a coffee shop on the outskirts of Boston. Ellis Hampton, 38, sat across from me carrying the specific exhaustion that comes from being the only honest person left in a failing company. Dark circles under his eyes, hands that wouldn't stop moving, the look of a man who'd spent weeks trying to fix a structural collapse with duct tape and prayer. He'd reached out through an anonymous email. "I'm the CFO of your son's firm. There are things you need to know before November 18th. We met at a coffee shop 20 miles from downtown, neutral territory, no witnesses who would recognize either of us." Ellis ordered black coffee and didn't drink it. "Mrs. Lockwood," he said, his voice low and urgent, "the firm needs $500,000 in the next 90 days, or we file for liquidation. The November event isn't a celebration, it's an emergency capital pitch." I set down my tea. "Explain." "Clayton structured it as a corporate milestone party," Ellis said. 200 guests, high-profile venue. It's designed to look like a success celebration, but every single invitation went to potential investors or current creditors. The entire event is a fundraising operation disguised as a wedding reception. "How much does my son actually owe?" I asked. Ellis pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket and slid it across the table. Handwritten numbers. No company letterhead. Nothing traceable. $180,000 to commercial banks, he said. $95,000 to a silent partner who's gotten very loud. And Saskia's interior design studio is losing $40,000. Neither of them knows the other is drowning. I looked at the numbers, did the math. That's over $300,000. You said he needs $500. "Operating expenses, payroll, vendor contracts," Ellis said. "The deficit isn't just debt, it's burn rate. Without $500,000 in the next 3 months, the firm collapses and takes Saskia's studio with it. How do you reconcile loving someone who workshopped your destruction with the same attention he'd give a quarterly earnings presentation? You don't. You stop trying to reconcile it and start documenting the pattern." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Ellis looked at me directly for the first time. "Because he told me you were just an aging event coordinator who helped with minor logistics," he said. "But I looked you up. I saw your resume. I know who you actually are. And I know what he's asking you to do without telling you what it's actually for." "He hasn't asked me to do anything," I said. Ellis shook his head. "He will. He's going to ask you to help coordinate the November event. He'll frame it as a family favor, a way to contribute to his big moment. He won't tell you it's a fraudulent fundraising scheme. He won't tell you every conversation in that room is a pitch meeting he's staging to look like a celebration. And if I say no, he'll ask Saskia to guilt you into it," Ellis said. "I've already heard them rehearsing that conversation too." I thanked Ellis, told him I appreciated the warning, drove home in silence. 3 weeks later, Clayton called and asked if I'd help coordinate the event logistics for his big celebration. Family milestone, once-in-a-lifetime moment. Would really mean a lot to have me involved. I said yes, not because I believed him, because I needed to see exactly how far he was willing to go. He wasn't throwing a party to celebrate. He was throwing a party to survive. And somewhere between the rehearsed insults and the fraudulent investor pitch, my son had decided the most useful thing his mother could do was disappear from the room entirely. That's when I stopped reading it as cruelty and started reading it as strategy. He wasn't celebrating, he was drowning and using my erasure as a lifeboat. When someone uses you as a lifeboat, they never ask if you can swim. They just assume you'll drown quietly. 3 weeks before my son canceled the venue, he called and asked me to coordinate the entire corporate event, and like every other time in 40 years, I said yes before he finished asking. It was late October, a Thursday evening. I was making dinner when the phone rang. "Mom, I need a favor," Clayton said. His voice had that specific tone he used when he wanted something but needed it to sound casual. "The November corporate celebration, could you handle the coordination? You know how these things work better than anyone." No mention of the money he owed me. No mention of the insolvency Ellis had warned me about. No acknowledgement that I'd spent 40 years building the exact skill set he needed, and 3 years in retirement watching it go unused. "Of course," I said. "What's the timeline?" "3 weeks," he said. "November 18th, 200 guests, Thornfield Estate. I need it to be perfect." I spent the next 21 days on the phone. I called every vendor I'd worked with over 3 decades, negotiated catering contracts with companies that owed me favors, from events I'd coordinated when their businesses were still operating out of commercial kitchens, secured premium linens at cost from a supplier whose daughter's wedding I'd salvaged after the original coordinator quit 2 weeks before the ceremony, booked a florist who'd built his entire client base on referrals I'd sent him in the 90s. I slashed the catering overhead by $22,000, got the floral budget reduced by $18,000, secured venue coordination at half the standard rate because Conrad Hartley had worked with me on a dozen high-profile galas and trusted my logistics. I saved Clayton's firm $47,000 in 3 weeks. He called me once during those 3 weeks, not to say thank you, to ask if I'd confirmed the ice sculpture. If you've ever poured yourself into helping someone succeed only to realize they considered your work a footnote in their own story, you know the specific flavor of that particular invisibility. It doesn't sting. It doesn't rage. It settles into your bones like cold water and teaches you exactly how much space you actually occupy in someone else's life. I finished the coordination work on November 15th, sent Clayton the final timeline, the vendor contact sheet, the emergency protocol document. He replied with a thumbs-up emoji. 2 days later, while I sat in a hospital room with Helen, he canceled the venue. And on November 18th, at 6:35 in the morning, 25 minutes after Conrad's phone call, woke me from the only world I thought I understood. Gwendolyn sent me a text message that contained 3 screenshots. I was still sitting at my kitchen table with the black book open in front of me when my phone buzzed. Gwendolyn's message was short. "You need to see this. I'm sorry." The first screenshot was a text message exchange between Clayton and Saskia, dated November 4th at 3:47 p.m., the afternoon of the Thornfield site visit, hours after he'd publicly humiliated me in front of Conrad. "Saskia, if she shows up with that ridiculous green notebook tomorrow, it'll be genuinely hilarious. Clayton, she'll probably bring a backup binder too. That's the level of pathetic we're dealing with. Saskia, do you think she'll actually drive to Thornfield on Saturday? Clayton. Oh, she'll show up. She always shows up. That's the whole point." The second screenshot was from November 10th. "Saskia, I almost feel bad about the venue thing. Clayton, don't. She'll recover. She always does. And honestly, watching her show up to a locked gate might be the wake-up call she needs to finally accept she's not relevant anymore. Saskia, what if she calls you? Clayton, she won't. She'll just stand there with her little notebook and her to-do lists and eventually drive home. It's not cruel. It's just reality." The third screenshot was from November 15th, the day of the cancellation. "Clayton done. Executed at 2:47. She's at the hospital until 7. Won't see the confirmation until tonight, and by then it'll be too late to do anything about it. Saskia, you're sure she won't freak out and call the venue directly? Clayton, she's too professional for that. She'll assume there's been a miscommunication. She'll wait for me to reach out with clarification. And I won't. That's the beauty of it." I read all 3 screenshots twice. Then I set the phone down very carefully on the kitchen table and stared at the wall. Reading those texts felt like watching someone draw up blueprints for your destruction and realizing they'd been working on the design for weeks. Every detail calibrated, every reaction anticipated, every possible response already mapped out and neutralized. They weren't trying to keep me away from the venue. They were counting on me to show up. The locked gate wasn't meant to stop me. It was meant to be the last thing I saw before I fell apart. They'd imagined the scene, me arriving at Thornfield Estate at 5:45 p.m. with my ridiculous green notebook, my backup binder, my professional composure, finding the gates chained, the property dark, no cars in the lot, no guests arriving, no event, just me standing alone in a November parking lot holding 40 years of professional credibility in a binder nobody thought was worth respecting. They'd wanted to watch me realize I'd been erased, not excluded, erased. Saskia had even joked about it, genuinely hilarious, the level of pathetic we're dealing with. Clayton had timed the cancellation for the exact window when I'd be unreachable, had anticipated every possible reaction, had bet on my professionalism preventing me from making a scene, had counted on me standing at that locked gate and absorbing the humiliation in silence because that's what I'd always done. They'd workshopped my destruction like a corporate presentation, rehearsed the insults like talking points, and engineered the locked gate moment like the climax of a performance I didn't know I was starring in. I picked up my phone and looked at the screenshots one more time. That ridiculous green notebook. The level of pathetic we're dealing with. Watching her show up to a locked gate might be the wake-up call she needs. I closed the message thread and opened the black book to the first tabbed section. The locked gate wasn't meant to stop me from attending the event. It was meant to break me when I arrived alone, humiliated, holding my ridiculous green notebook in an empty parking lot while 200 guests drove past toward a venue that didn't exist. They'd calculated every variable except one. I had 6 hours left and 40 years of practice turning empty rooms into something worth remembering. 6 hours is a long time when you've spent 40 years preparing for exactly this kind of emergency. At 6:45 on a Saturday morning, I opened the black book to the page marked with red silk ribbon and ran my finger down 23 names that had taken 40 years to earn the right to call. Page 47, Executive Tier Northeast Corridor. The names were arranged in order of professional seniority, not alphabetical. That was deliberate. When you call a network into activation, you start with the anchors, the people whose yes will cascade into other yeses, whose presence will validate the entire room before the doors even open. I picked up my phone and dialed the first number. Leland Whitfield, 73 years old, private equity titan, built a biotech portfolio worth $900 million, starting from the pro bono launch event I'd coordinated for him in 1998, when he had $8,000 and a pitch deck. The phone rang twice. "Edith," he said. His voice was alert awake. He'd always been an early riser. "It's been too long." "Mr. Whitfield." I said, my voice steady and formal in the way that signals this is business, not social. "I am personally directing an executive gathering this evening at 7:30. I would be deeply honored to have you in my room." 3 seconds of silence. "Edith," he said. "The answer is yes. Text me the address when you have it. I'll be there." I thanked him, ended the call, and logged his confirmation in green ink next to his name. 6:47 a.m. I dialed the second number. Margaret Sutton, 61, founder of a venture capital firm that specialized in women-led startups. I'd coordinated her first major fundraising gala in 2009 when her firm managed $30 million. Now it managed $600. She answered on the first ring. "I am personally directing an executive gathering this evening at 7:30, I said. "I would be deeply honored to have you in my room." "I'll move a donor dinner," Margaret said immediately. "What's the address?" "I'll text it within the hour." Done. Green ink. Second name confirmed. 6:49 a.m. Gerald Morrison, 73, hedge fund manager. I'd set up his firm's anniversary dinner in 1998, the same week I'd coordinated Leland's launch event. He'd made $200 million that year on a single biotech acquisition. The dinner had been his victory lap. I'd made sure every detail was flawless. "Edith Lockwood," he said when he answered. Not a question, a statement. Like he'd been expecting the call for 3 years. "Where and when?" "This evening at 7:30. Location to follow within the hour. I'll be there, he said. And Edith, it's good to hear your voice. Third confirmation, green ink. You need to understand what it means when 19 people worth a combined $4 billion say yes to a phone call without asking a single question about what they're saying yes to. It means you spent 40 years building something that can't be quantified on a balance sheet or captured in a LinkedIn connection count. It means every room you ever set up, every crisis you ever solved at 11 p.m. on a Friday, every time you remembered someone's coffee order or their daughter's college graduation, or the specific way they preferred their name, announced when entering a gala, all of it accumulated into a form of capital that doesn't depreciate. I kept calling. Vincent Russo, Managing Director, Russo Capital Partners. The man whose business card had sat on Clayton's desk, the client who had no idea the referral chain led back to me. I am personally directing an executive gathering this evening. I'll cancel my flight, he said. What do you need? Just your presence. You have it. Fourth confirmation. I called Helen Marsh from her hospital bed. She answered on the second ring, her voice still hoarse but alert. I need your estate attorney, I said. And I need a legal witness for what I'm about to do tonight. You're going to war, Helen said. It wasn't a question. I'm going to set up a room. Same thing, she said. I'll be there. Fifth confirmation. I called the corporate attorney David Fletcher from the firm that had represented 3 Fortune 500 companies whose product launches I'd coordinated. I called the CFO of a pharmaceutical company whose scandal I'd helped contain during a disastrous investor dinner in 2011 by quietly moving the press to a separate room. I called the foundation director whose charity gala I'd salvaged after the original venue flooded 6 hours before doors opened. Every single one of them said yes. No questions about the venue. No questions about the occasion. No questions about who else would be attending or what the agenda was or whether this conflicted with prior commitments. Just yes. Each confirmation felt like a small door opening in a hallway I'd been walking down alone for 3 years, and suddenly I wasn't walking alone anymore. The isolation I'd felt since retirement, the silence of a phone that used to ring with crises and requests, and the specific kind of professional intimacy that comes from solving impossible problems together, all of it dissolved with every green ink notation. By 7:15, I'd made 21 calls, 19 confirmations logged. 3 executives had routed their assistants with instructions to override whatever was on their calendar. One call went to voicemail Ira Townsend, Saskia's father, the man who'd looked at me across that Thanksgiving table and recognized what was happening. I didn't leave a message. I knew he'd see the missed call and know exactly what it meant. I set down the phone at 7:28 and looked at the page. Leland Whitfield, Margaret Sutton, Gerald Morrison, Vincent Russo, Helen Marsh, David Fletcher. 19 names marked with green ink. 19 of the Northeast's most powerful executives had just cleared their Saturday evening calendars to sit in a room I was personally directing. Not for Clayton, for me. 40 years of rooms. 40 years of showing up, fixing crises, remembering names, honoring commitments, building the kind of professional credibility that doesn't announce itself until the moment you need it to bear weight. And now one morning, all of them said yes back. I turned to the next page in the black book. Venue contacts priority access. The clock on my kitchen wall read 7:32. By 7:30, I had 19 confirmations logged in green ink. 19 of the Northeast's most powerful executives had just cleared their evening calendars to sit in a room I hadn't even secured yet. I had exactly 8 minutes to find a space that could hold what I'd just promised. 8 minutes isn't much time unless you spent 6 years writing the contract that makes them count. At 7:32, I dialed the Harrington Center and invoked a contract clause I'd written into my retirement agreement 6 years earlier for a crisis I'd never imagined would be my own son. The phone rang 3 times. Harrington Center, this is Richard. Richard Caldwell, General Manager of the Harrington Center, the son of the man who'd helped me secure my first director position back in 1995, had been a nervous conference coordinator when I'd mentored him through his first major gala 15 years ago. Now he ran the venue where I'd spent the first 20 years of my career, building rooms that governors and CEOs still remembered. Richard. I said, my voice formal and precise. "This is Edith Lockwood. I'm invoking Section 3, Subsection B of my Master Service Agreement. Emergency Priority Booking Retired Director Tier." Silence. The kind that follows when someone realizes a standard phone call just became a legal invocation. "Edith," he said carefully, "let me pull your file." I heard keyboard keys clicking. 30 seconds of silence. "Retirement date, June 2020. He read aloud. "MSA clause active through June 2025. You're clear. What do you need?" "The Grand Ballroom," I said. "Tonight. 7:30 doors. I need it in writing in the next 8 minutes." Another pause, shorter this time. "Edith, the Grand Ballroom booked 6 months in advance. It's check tonight's schedule," I said. More keyboard sounds. "We had a postponement," Richard said slowly. "Corporate retreat canceled yesterday. The room is technically available, but we'd need to pull weekend staff coordinate. Section 3, Subsection B includes priority staffing allocation," I said. "I wrote that clause. You have 8 minutes to send me the confirmation." "You wrote the clause," Richard repeated. Not a question. Recognition. "In 2019, I said, standard MSA language doesn't include emergency booking rights for retired directors. I added it during contract negotiations because I'd spent 40 years watching directors get forced out with no safety net. I built mine." Richard laughed, a short, amazed sound. "The confirmation will be in your inbox in 5 minutes, he said. "And Edith, welcome back." I thanked him and ended the call. 7:39 a.m. The Grand Ballroom was mine. The room where my career had started in 1977 as a terrified 22-year-old banquet server. The room where I'd coordinated presidential campaign fundraisers and Fortune 500 product launches and charity galas that moved millions of dollars in a single evening. The room I'd worked in for 20 years before moving to the Ritz-Carlton. And now in 48 hours' notice, it was mine again. There's a difference between networking and building, something that lasts. One is transactional. The other is what happens when you show up for people, when the room is empty and nobody's watching. Richard Caldwell remembered that I'd stayed late 15 years ago to walk him through his first crisis, when a keynote speaker canceled 2 hours before doors opened. I'd helped him rebuild the program, coached him through the announcement, made sure he looked competent in front of his supervisors. He'd been promoted 6 months later. Some debts don't expire. I looked at my watch, 7:42 a.m. I had a venue. I had 19 confirmations. I needed flowers, catering, linens, lighting, staffing. I picked up my phone and dialed the number I'd called 3 weeks ago when Clayton asked me to coordinate his event. Vincent Palmer answered on the second ring. Vincent Palmer had been designing luxury floral arrangements for Boston's elite for 30 years, and he'd almost lost everything in 2011 until I signed papers the banks said were too risky. "Vincent," I said, "this is Edith Lockwood. I have a venue change that requires—" He cut me off. "Give me the new loading dock address," he said. "Everything else I'll figure out." "Vincent, you haven't heard. Harrington Center," he said. "You're the only person who'd be calling me at 7:40 on a Saturday morning with a same-day venue reroute who'd also start with an apology. What's the new timeline?" I closed my eyes. "Doors at 7:30 tonight. 200 centerpieces need to move from Thornfield Estate in Greenwich to Harrington Center in Boston. Can you—" "Already texting my team," Vincent said. I heard his phone buzzing in the background. "We loaded the truck for Thornfield at 5 this morning. I'll have them reroute before they hit the highway. 45 minutes to Harrington's loading dock. We'll reset the designs for the new room dimensions." "Vincent, in 2011, when the banks tried to foreclose on my studio, you signed a personal guarantee to keep my doors open," he said quietly. "You didn't ask diagnostic questions then. I won't ask them now." I didn't say anything. "The centerpieces will be there by 9, Vincent said. "And Edith, whatever you're building tonight, I'm honored to be part of it." He ended the call before I could respond. I set the phone down and looked at my hands. They were steady, completely steady. Vincent didn't ask questions, because 13 years ago I didn't ask questions either. I just signed the papers and kept his studio alive, and some debts compound interest in ways accountants never calculate. I picked up the black book and turned to the vendor section. Catering, lighting, linen, staffing, AV coordination. Every vendor I'd saved $47,000 for 3 weeks ago was now contracted to Thornfield Estate. Every single one of them had my cell phone number. Every single one of them owed me favors that stretched back decades. I started making calls. By 8:15, the caterer had rerouted from Thornfield to Harrington. By 8:25, the lighting designer confirmed the new load-in schedule. By 8:30, the linen company was adjusting table counts for the Harrington's grand ballroom dimensions instead of Thornfield's estate layout. Every single call followed the same pattern. I'd start to explain. They'd interrupt. They'd ask for the new address. They'd confirm the timeline. They'd tell me it was handled. No questions about why the venue changed. No questions about who authorized the reroute. No questions about payment or contracts or the legal implications of abandoning one site for another with 12 hours notice. Just yes. By 8:45, 200 centerpieces were rerouting across Boston. The Harrington's weekend staff were being pulled from rotation, and the grand ballroom I'd worked in for 40 years was mine for the evening. 40 years of professional relationships were converting into logistical machinery in real time. I looked at the black book, turned to a page marked with a blue ribbon, and ran my finger down to one specific name. I had one more call to make, the one that would turn 19 confirmations into the kind of power my son had spent 2 years failing to attract. The call I placed at 8:45 a.m. wasn't to a vendor. It was to Leland Whitfield, the man whose $4 billion empire began in a room I'd built for free 25 years ago. He answered on the first ring. "Edith," he said, his voice warm with expectation. "Mr. Whitfield," I kept it formal, "I am personally directing an executive gathering at 7:30 tonight at the Harrington Center. I believed you should calculate that into your plans." "I'll move aboard dinner," Leland replied instantly. "Edith, I still carry your gold-rimmed business card from the 1998 launch in my breast pocket. It reminds me that the most valuable investments start with a yes when nobody else is saying it. My calendar is clear. See you at the Harrington." "Thank you, Mr. Whitfield." "Leland," he corrected gently. "After 25 years, we can dispense with formality. Whatever you're building tonight, I'm honored to be included." As I set the phone down, the weight of what I'd just done settled in. Leland was the kingmaker my son Clayton had spent 6 months courting to legitimize his fraudulent fundraising pitch. In 30 seconds, Leland had committed to my room instead. When a financial titan clears his Saturday night for you, it proves you built something unquantifiable. Every hour spent supporting someone else's success becomes your foundation when you finally need it. It was 8:52 a.m. I had secured a venue, rerouted vendors, assembled 19 elite executives, and stolen Clayton's anchor investor. Yet a comment from Ellis Hampton echoed in my mind. Saskia's interior design studio is losing $40,000. Neither of them knows the other is drowning. I recalled a meeting from October with my estate attorney, Barbara Reynolds. She had pulled Clayton's prenuptial agreement from 2018, pointing out an unusual insolvency forfeiture clause on page 14. If the business fails within 7 years of marriage, his wife retains exclusive ownership of all jointly held assets, Barbara had explained. They are in year 5. The firm is actively collapsing. Has he disclosed the debt to her? No, I had realized. I don't think he has. Saskia was performing a role in a marriage built on lies. Her father, Ira Townsend, had likely insisted on this protection, which Clayton accepted, assuming he would never fail. Now, facing liquidation, Clayton was hiding the truth. Saskia didn't know about his $180,000 bank debt, the $95,000 owed to a silent partner, or her own studio's $40,000 deficit. She was cruel because she thought they were winning. She mocked my green notebook because she believed her husband was successful. Entirely unaware their lifestyle was sustained by the high-interest loan I'd wired 2 years ago, which Clayton had disguised as a family gift. Saskia wasn't the villain. She was a terrified casualty trapped in an illusion. I looked at the clock, 9:20 a.m. I had just learned my antagonist was actually another victim. Victims can still choose sides. That's the difference between being trapped and being complicit. At 9:15, my laptop chimed with an email from Conrad Hartley at Thornfield Estate, and the subject line read 3 words, "Audio file attached." I opened it. The email was short, professional, apologetic. Mrs. Lockwood, I should have spoken up during the site visit. This recording was captured by our Ambient Diagnostic System Standard Venue Protocol for event planning sessions. All technical consultations are recorded for liability and quality assurance purposes. I thought you should have it. Conrad Hartley, General Manager, Thornfield Estate. I clicked on the attachment. A 3-minute audio file, timestamped November 4th, 17 p.m. I pressed play. The sound quality was pristine. No static, no ambient noise filtering. Just voices captured with the clinical precision of a diagnostic microphone system designed to record every word spoken during venue consultations. Clayton's voice came through first clear and confident. The floral budget is excessive. My mother tends to overestimate these things because she doesn't understand modern cost structures. Saskia's laugh, light conspiratorial. Well, she's from a different generation. They didn't have business school back then. She didn't even go to college, Clayton said. The contempt in his voice was very clear. My mother is just a dropout who counts forks. She's good at minor logistics, but she's never understood the strategic architecture of what I'm building. I stopped the playback, set the laptop down, stared at the wall for 30 seconds. Then I forwarded the raw audio file to Gwendolyn without adding a subject line or a message. She'd know what it was. She'd know what to do with it. I closed the laptop. I didn't need to hear it again. I'd heard versions of it my entire life. The assumption that people who work with their hands don't think with their heads. That service work is proof of intellectual limitation that someone who spent 40 years making sure other people looked competent must not have been competent themselves. But there's a particular kind of clarity that comes from hearing someone you raised describe you with contempt in a voice they think is private. It strips away every illusion you've been holding about what love means to them. Clayton didn't love me. He loved the idea of a resource he could activate when convenient and dismiss when unnecessary. The audio file was legally obtained, standard venue protocol, admissible in any context where character or credibility needed to be established. Conrad had handed me evidence that couldn't be disputed or dismissed as hearsay. I looked at the clock. 9:28 a.m. I had one more message to send, the most delicate one. The one that would determine whether Saskia's father stood beside his daughter's lies or stood in the room where the truth would be revealed. I picked up my phone and dialed Gerald Morrison. Gerald Morrison had retired from State Street Bank 3 years before I left the Ritz, and we'd crossed paths often enough at industry events that I knew he still played golf with Ira Townsend every Thursday. They were the kind of old-money Boston professionals who'd known each other for 40 years and spoken the coded language of men who'd spent decades reading balance sheets and spotting creative accounting. Gerald answered on the second ring. "Edith," he said warmly, "twice in one morning. I'm starting to feel spoiled." "Gerald, I need you to relay a message to Ira Townsend," I said. "Tell him I'm directing an executive gathering at the Harrington tonight at 7:30. He may find the corporate structural variables shifting in that room highly relevant to his family portfolio." Silence. Gerald Morrison had spent 35 years in banking. He understood coded language. "Family portfolio," he repeated slowly. "As in his daughter's family. As in his son-in-law's firm," I said. "He'll understand what I mean. He spent 40 years reading balance sheets, and he knows when the numbers don't add up." "I'll call him now," Gerald said quietly. "Edith, whatever you're doing tonight, I suspect it's going to be memorable." "That's the hope," I said. I ended the call and set the phone down. 10 minutes later, Gwendolyn texted me a screenshot. It was a calendar notification from Ira Townsend's executive assistant, forwarded to her through the network of administrative professionals who coordinate Boston's financial elite. Saturday, November 18th, 7:30 p.m. redirected to Harrington Center. Driver notified. Evening plans adjusted. Ira Townsend had looked at me across a Thanksgiving table and known something was deeply wrong with the numbers his daughter was celebrating, and now he'd just chosen to stand in the room where the truth would be exposed. He could have called Saskia, could have warned Clayton, could have used his 40 years of financial expertise to help his daughter's husband navigate the insolvency crisis before it became public knowledge, Instead, he'd redirected his driver to the Harrington Center. He'd chosen to bear witness. Some men spend their entire careers learning to recognize fraud, and when they finally see it at their own family dinner table, they have to decide whether loyalty means protecting the lie or standing in the room where it gets exposed. Ira Townsend had just made his choice. He was coming to my room, not to support his daughter, not to defend his son-in-law, to watch what happened when 40 years of professional credibility met 2 years of calculated deception in a ballroom full of people who knew the difference between competence and performance. Saskia's own father had chosen the truth over her comfort. That's what happens when you build a marriage on lies, and your father has spent 4 decades managing trust accounts. Eventually, he reads the fine print you didn't know existed and calculates the variables you've been ignoring. I looked at my phone. Another text from Gwendolyn. Floor setup in progress. ETA 1 Euro PM for completion. You should start getting ready. Tonight requires the armor, not the uniform. She was right. I walked upstairs to my bedroom and opened the closet. In the back, wrapped in protective covering, hung the midnight navy gown I'd bought 8 years ago for Edmund's retirement party, the one that never happened because he'd had a stroke 6 weeks before the date. I'd never worn it, never found an occasion that felt significant enough. Tonight was that occasion. I looked at the clock. 10:02 a.m. 5 hours and 28 minutes until doors opened. Ira Townsend was the kind of man who'd spent 40 years managing family trusts and could recognize fraud when it sat across from him at dinner. He'd just received word that his son-in-law's company was about to be dissected in front of Boston's financial elite, and he'd chosen to witness it rather than prevent it. He was the kind of man who knew when a deal wasn't what it appeared. And I was the kind of woman who'd spent 40 years learning to build rooms for people who knew exactly what deals actually were. At 10 o'clock, I opened my laptop to a live video feed from the Harrington Grand Ballroom and watched Gwendolyn orchestrate a team of 6 people through a space I'd commanded for 40 years without ever needing to raise my voice. The camera angle showed the full ballroom from the mezzanine level, 200 chairs being arranged in precise rows, lighting crew, running cables, floral team positioning centerpieces. The room looked exactly like it had when I directed events here, controlled, elegant, purposeful. Gwendolyn's face appeared in the video frame, leaning close to the laptop camera. "Edith," she said, "we're on schedule. Everything's moving." I nodded. "The table spacing looks perfect." "I learned from the best," Gwendolyn said. Then she paused. Her expression shifted. "I need to tell you something I've been holding back." I waited. "I've been tracking the firm's vendor payments for 6 months," she said quietly. "Through my network. The caterers, the florists, the venue coordinators, anyone who's done business with Farrell Consulting. I've been documenting every late payment, every renegotiated contract, every vendor who got paid half what they invoiced." I didn't say anything. "The $95,000 loan is documented," Gwendolyn continued. "The silent partner Ellis mentioned. I have copies of the payment schedule Clayton's been missing. I waited to tell you until I had everything verified. I didn't want to break your heart with rumors." She'd been protecting me. For 6 months, while I thought I was walking into this alone, Gwendolyn had been quietly building a parallel case file, not asking permission, not seeking credit, just standing guard. There's a specific kind of love that manifests as 6 months of quiet intelligence, gathering, not asking permission, not seeking credit, just standing guard over someone who taught you how to stand in the first place. "Thank you," I said. Gwendolyn nodded once, sharp and professional. "The grand ballroom seats 250, she said. "We have 200 confirmed. I'm going to leave the extra 50 seats empty at the back. Visible. Let people notice the absence. Let them see we didn't oversell the room. We just didn't need more than 200 to make the statement." It was a perfect detail, the kind of visual choice that communicated control instead of scarcity. "Do it," I said. Gwendolyn smiled. 4 hours until doors. I'll text you when we're locked and loaded." She ended the video call. I closed the laptop and sat in the silence of my home office. She'd been protecting me by gathering evidence while I thought I was managing this crisis alone. That's what 40 years of mentorship builds, not gratitude that fades when the job ends, but loyalty that activates the moment someone you taught needs the skills you gave them, turned back in their direction. I looked at the clock. 11:15 a.m. I walked upstairs to my bedroom. The garment bag hung on the back of the closet door where I'd left it that morning. Midnight navy silk, untouched for 8 years, waiting for an occasion that had never come. Until now. I unzipped the bag slowly. The gown was exactly as I remembered it. Floor-length, structured shoulders, clean lines that didn't apologize for occupying space. I'd bought it in 2015 for a gala Edmund and I were supposed to attend together, a retirement celebration for a colleague. Black tie, the kind of event where I'd spent 40 years making sure other people looked elegant and finally had permission to look elegant myself. Edmund had suffered his stroke 6 weeks before the gala. The dress had stayed in the garment bag ever since. I heard the front door open downstairs. "Edith," Helen's voice called up. "I'm here to play lady's maid." I smiled despite myself. Helen Marsh climbed the stairs slowly, still recovering from the pneumonia that had kept her hospitalized 3 days ago. She was dressed carefully, moving with the deliberate precision of someone who'd just been released from a hospital bed and refused to let weakness show. She stopped in the bedroom doorway and looked at the gown. "Oh," she said softly, "that dress. You remember it," I said. "I was with you when you bought it." Helen said, "Newbury Street. You tried on 7 before you found this one. Edmund was going to love it." I lifted the gown from the bag and laid it carefully on the bed. Helen walked over and ran her fingers along the silk. "I bought this dress 8 years ago for your husband to see you in," she said quietly. "He would have loved it." "He never got the chance," I said. Helen looked at me. "So you're giving him the chance now, wearing it to the room where you built everything he was so proud of." I stepped into the gown. Helen moved behind me and pulled the zipper up slowly, carefully. The way friends do when getting dressed is also a ritual of preparation for battle. The dress fit perfectly. 8 years in a garment bag hadn't changed the measurements. My body remembered the shape it was supposed to hold. If you've ever gotten dressed for something that matters while holding the memory of someone who won't be there to see it, you know that grief and purpose can wear the same dress. They fit the same way, close to the skin, impossible to ignore, transforming you into a version of yourself that's both who you were and who you're becoming. Helen stepped back and studied me. "How long has it been since he saw you command a room looking like this?" she asked. I thought about it. The last formal event Edmund and I attended together was in 2014, a fundraising gala I'd coordinated. He'd worn his navy suit. I'd worn something forgettable. We'd danced twice. He'd told me I made the impossible look easy. 10 years, I said. Helen nodded. "He would have liked this dress," she said. "He would have loved what you're about to do with it." I turned to face the full-length mirror. Edmund had hung that mirror 30 years ago when we first bought this house. He'd measured the wall, found the studs, mounted it at exactly the right height so I could see my full reflection when I got dressed for work. "So you always know what you look like when you walk into a room," he'd said. I looked at myself now. The dress fit perfectly. My hands were absolutely steady. My expression was calm. I looked like a woman who'd spent 40 years learning to command spaces and was about to do it one final time. In 4 hours, I would walk into the grand ballroom where my career began at 22, and I would command it again. He would have liked this dress. But first, I needed to see what he'd built with his lies and what I'd dismantled with the truth. The driver takes the scenic route without being asked. I sit in the back of the hired town car, hands folded in my lap, the midnight navy gown smooth against the leather seat. The November afternoon light filters through bare trees along the Greenwich Road, casting long shadows across the pavement. The driver, James, a professional I've used for formal events for 15 years, glances at me in the rearview mirror. "Ma'am," he says quietly, "we're approaching Thornfield." I see it, I say. "Slow down, please." He doesn't ask why. He's driven me to enough venue sites over the years to understand when a route adjustment is deliberate. He knows I want to witness something even if he doesn't know exactly what. The car turns onto the private road leading to Thornfield Estate. I've coordinated events at this venue for 3 decades. Weddings, corporate galas, fundraising dinners. I know every room, every sightline, every loading dock entrance. I know which caterers the estate manager prefers and which florists have priority access, and exactly how long it takes to reset the grand hall between cocktail hour and dinner service. I helped build Thornfield's reputation as the premier event venue in Greenwich, and now I'm watching it appear through the car window like a location I've never seen before. The wrought iron gates come into view. They're closed, chained, a heavy padlock securing the center. 2 signs posted on either side: private property, no trespassing. The car slows to a crawl. James doesn't need to be told. He knows to pause. He knows I need this moment. I lean forward slightly and look through the gates. The grounds are immaculate, perfectly maintained. The fountain in the center courtyard, the one I lit with floating candles for the Morrison wedding 20 years ago. The event that was featured in Connecticut Magazine, sits silent and still. The terrace where I coordinated the Caldwell anniversary dinner stretches empty in the afternoon light. Everything looks exactly as it should for a 6 o'clock wedding reception, except the gates are locked and nobody's coming. The car slows and suddenly I can hear everything. Gravel crunching beneath tires, wind rustling through bare oak branches, the faint creak of the wrought iron gates shifting in the breeze. The quiet is profound. On a normal Saturday at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Thornfield would be alive with activity caterers, unloading florists, arranging centerpieces, the estate manager coordinating vendor arrivals, early setup crew testing sound systems. Today, silence. The kind of silence that only exists in places designed for celebration when the celebration has been canceled and nobody bothered to tell the guests. I look at the fountain through the gates. The Morrison wedding. I was 43. Clayton was 12. He'd helped me carry boxes of floating candles from the car to the fountain, complaining about missing his soccer game, but secretly fascinated by the logistics of it all. "How do you remember all their names?" he'd asked, watching me greet the Morrisons, the Caldwells, the Russos as they arrived. "You just do," I'd told him. "When you care about people, you remember." He'd nodded solemn and earnest like he was filing away something important. That boy knew how to care. I don't know when he stopped. I pull out my phone and frame the shot carefully. The gates centered, the chains visible, the no trespassing signs clear in the November light, the fountain just visible through the bars. I take one photograph, not for social media, not for evidence in any legal sense, just for me. A record of the moment my son's perfect wedding became impossible. The moment his carefully constructed fraud collapsed into the reality of locked gates and empty grounds. Before I tell you what those locked gates meant, if you've ever been erased by someone, you raised comment how long you stayed invisible. One sentence. This is where planning becomes action. Please note some details are recreated for storytelling. The truth behind it is what matters. I lower the phone and look at James in the rearview mirror. The boy who once carried candle boxes for me and asked questions about remembering names had become a man who called me a dropout, who counts forks. Somewhere in the 28 years between that Morrison wedding and this locked gate, my son had learned to see rooms as opportunities and people as resources. And I had learned slowly, painfully, across 40 years of invisible labor, that the most important rooms are the ones you build when nobody thinks you're capable of building anything at all. "Now we go," I say. And I had learned slowly, painfully, across 40 years of invisible labor, that the most important rooms are the ones you build when nobody thinks you're capable of building anything at all. "Now we go," I say. The words are quiet, but they carry 8 years of grief for a husband who died before seeing me wear this dress. 2 years of watching my life savings disappear into a son's failing business. 6 months of meticulous planning, since the morning I realized he'd forgotten to invite me to his own wedding. James nods once and shifts the car into drive. The locked gates of Thornfield Estate recede in the rearview mirror as we accelerate back toward the main road. 4 hours from now, 200 guests will arrive at this location expecting a wedding reception. They'll find locked gates, dark windows, and the profound silence of a venue that was canceled 3 days ago, while the mother of the groom sat unreachable in a hospital room. But they won't stay at those gates wondering what happened, because by then they'll have received new invitations, new addresses, New instructions directing them to the Harrington Center Grand Ballroom in Boston, where a different kind of evening is being prepared. The gates of Thornfield recede in the rearview mirror as the car accelerates toward the highway heading back to Boston and whatever comes next. What comes next I already knew. What I didn't know yet was how long it would take my son to understand what was happening to him. While I was driving back toward Boston, Clayton was standing in the reception hall at Westbrook Country Club, Newton, watching his carefully constructed fraud begin its slow-motion collapse. I learned the details later from Gwendolyn's network from venue staff, who knew me from the digital trail Clayton left as he tried to diagnose the disaster in real time. But here's what happened. Clayton's phone hasn't made a sound in 40 minutes. By 2:30 in the afternoon, 40 guests had arrived at Westbrook Country Club. 40 guests where 80 had confirmed attendance just 2 days earlier. The Caldwells, the Russos, a handful of Saskia's college friends who didn't understand they were attending a fraudulent fundraising operation disguised as a wedding reception. The room was set for 200. Clayton stood near the entrance, watching arrivals with the fixed smile of someone pretending everything was proceeding according to plan, while privately calculating exactly how catastrophic the absence actually was. Saskia approached her expression tight with the specific anxiety that comes from hosting an event where the guest count doesn't match the RSVP list. Maybe traffic, she said. The forecast said rain. It's not raining, Clayton said. He refreshed his email for the 8th time in 20 minutes. 3 new messages, all cancellations, all sent within the last 90 minutes. Gerald Morrison, regret to inform you of unavoidable conflict. Margaret Sutton, unforeseen circumstances require my absence. Leland Whitfield, unable to attend. Best wishes. 3 anchor investors, 3 formal cancellations, all within the same narrow time window. That wasn't coincidence, that was coordination. Clayton's internal monologue, the one I reconstructed later from what Ellis Hampton told me from what venue staff overheard, ran something like this. Gerald Morrison confirmed yesterday. Called personally. Margaret Sutton sent a gift last week. Where are they? A venue coordinator approached young and professional and deeply uncomfortable. Sir, she said carefully, we've set for 200. Should we adjust the seating chart? No, Clayton said. People are just running late. But people weren't running late. People weren't coming. By 3:30, the sparse crowd had thinned further. Some of Saskia's college friends had left early, citing prior commitments. The Russos stayed, but looked increasingly confused about why the room felt so empty. Clayton pulled out his phone and opened LinkedIn. You don't refresh LinkedIn at your own wedding unless something is very wrong. He searched for Gerald Morrison's profile, just checking. Maybe Morrison was traveling. Maybe there'd been a family emergency. Maybe there was a rational explanation for why a man who'd confirmed attendance less than 24 hours ago had sent a formal cancellation 90 minutes before the event. Gerald Morrison's profile loaded. Status update posted 1 hour ago. Looking forward to tonight's celebration. Clayton stared at the screen. Morrison doesn't post on LinkedIn, he thought. He's 73. He barely knows how to use the platform. Why is he posting today? He clicked on Margaret Sutton's profile. Same thing. Status update from 40 minutes ago. Excited for this evening's milestone event. Vincent Russo, Helen Marsh, David Fletcher. All of them, all posting within the last 2 hours. All marked as attending event tonight. All posting from Boston. Clayton's hands were steady on the phone. His heart was not. He clicked through the profiles, methodically building a list in his head. 8 high-value contacts. 8 people he'd been courting for months as anchor investors for his capital rescue operation. 8 people who were supposed to be at Westbrook Country Club right now writing checks and validating his fraudulent pitch. All of them were in Boston. All of them were attending something else. He clicked on Gerald Morrison's latest post. The text was brief, professional, looking forward to tonight's celebration at Harrington Center. Harrington Center. Clayton opened a new search window and typed Harrington Center, Boston. The website loaded. Elegant, established, premium. Harrington Center, Boston's premier venue for milestone celebrations since 1987. Private event space, corporate galas, high-profile fundraisers. the kind of venue that books 6 months in advance and charges rates that signal institutional credibility. Someone had booked the Harrington Center for tonight. Someone had invited his anchor investors. Someone had scheduled a competing event for the exact same evening as his wedding reception. Clayton cross-referenced his wedding guest list against the LinkedIn profiles showing Harrington Center attendance. 12 names, 12 confirmed wedding guests now marked as attending a different event in Boston. Morrison, Sutton, Marsh, Russo, Whitfield, Fletcher, every major investor he needed, every strategic contact he'd been cultivating, every person whose presence at Westbrook was supposed to signal that Farrell Consulting was a legitimate operation worth rescuing. All of them had chosen a different room. And then Clayton saw something that made his stomach drop. Julian Vance, who had physically checked in at Westbrook 90 minutes ago, who Clayton had personally greeted at the entrance, who was theoretically still somewhere in the building, had posted a status update from Boston 15 minutes ago. Honored to attend tonight's gathering at Harrington Center. Caldwell was at Westbrook, and Caldwell was posting from Boston. He was attending both events, or pretending to attend one while prioritizing the other, or had checked in at Westbrook as a courtesy before leaving for the event that actually mattered. Clayton scrolled through the names again. Morrison, Sutton, Marsh, Russo, Whitfield, Fletcher, Caldwell. 12 of his anchor investors, dozens of contacts from his mother's old professional network, people he'd been courting for 6 months, people who were supposed to validate his firm's legitimacy tonight, people who were supposed to write checks that would keep Farrell Consulting solvent past the 90-day liquidation deadline. All of them gathered at the Harrington Center for a milestone celebration happening at the exact moment his wedding was supposed to begin. Who books Harrington Center on the same night as my wedding? Clayton thought, and then slower, colder. Who has access to my entire investor contact list? He sat down in one of the 200 empty chairs, scrolled through the names one more time. Morrison, Sutton, Marsh, Russo, his mother's network. The contacts she'd built over 40 years, the relationships he'd been exploiting without ever acknowledging they came from her. He scrolled through the names and sat very still. While Clayton sat very still at Westbrook trying to understand what was happening, I was walking the perimeter of the room where everything began. Edith's palm finds the corner of table 1 without looking. 3 o'clock in the afternoon and the Harrington Center Grand Ballroom is exactly as I remember it. Same dimensions, same sight lines from entrance to stage, same acoustics that carry a champagne toast to the back row without amplification. I've been away from this room for 3 years, but my body remembers every corner. Gwendolyn stands near the entrance, clipboard in hand, watching me with the careful attention of someone who understands this moment is about more than logistics. You coordinated the Anderson merger dinner here, she says quietly. 1977, table 1 northeast corner. I was terrified I'd seated the CFO wrong. I say, my hand rests on the corner of table 1. The same table, the same corner, the same angle where I stood 46 years ago at 22 years old, trembling with the certainty that I was about to ruin someone's corporate merger celebration because I'd put the wrong executive next to the wrong board member. I hadn't ruined it. The event had been flawless. The CFO had sent me a thank you note the following week with a recommendation that led to my next 3 bookings. That night, that single successful event in this exact ballroom had been the foundation of everything that followed. A career comes full circle in the same room where it trembled to life. I walk slowly along the perimeter, touching the walls the way you touch something you thought you'd never see again. The ballroom seats 250. Gwendolyn has set up 200 chairs, leaving 50 empty at the back. Visible. Deliberate. A signal that we didn't oversell the room, we just didn't need more than 200 to make the statement. I stop at table 4, 3 tables away from where I'm standing. Southwest corner. Same white linens. Same candle arrangement. Edmund proposed 3 tables away from this exact spot. Table 4. He waited until dessert. It wasn't the Anderson merger dinner. It was years later. I was 31. He was 34. I'd just been promoted to director of events at the Ritz-Carlton, and we'd attended a colleague's retirement celebration in this ballroom. He'd waited until the speeches were over, until dessert was being served, until the moment when everyone was distracted and happy and not paying attention to the couple at table 4. Then he'd taken my hand under the table and asked me to marry him. I'd said yes before he finished the question. That was 37 years ago. He's been gone for 8. And tonight I'm standing in the room where he proposed wearing the dress I bought for him to see me in preparing to dismantle our son's fraudulent operation in front of 200 witnesses. Gwendolyn walks over and stands beside me. Your guests start arriving in 90 minutes, she says. Are you ready? I look at table 4. At table 1. At the empty chairs waiting to be filled with people who said yes when I called them this morning. I've been ready for 8 years, I say. Gwendolyn nods and returns to her coordination station near the entrance. I walk out of the ballroom and back to the preparation room where I'll wait until 7:30. The room is ready. The plan is ready. I'm ready. But across town at Westbrook Country Club, someone else is preparing for a very different kind of evening. I learned about Saskia's Instagram posts later from the screenshots Gwendolyn's network captured, before the deletion from the digital trail that never actually disappears, no matter how quickly you try to erase it. At 7 o'clock, exactly 30 minutes before my doors opened at the Harrington, Saskia Farrell posted an Instagram story. The image was carefully composed, tight crop, champagne flute in the foreground in focus. Background blurred just enough to suggest a full ballroom without revealing the actual guest count. Strategic lighting, professional staging. The caption, "Forever starts tonight. Grateful for everyone who made today perfect." She posted it. She tagged Clayton. She added a heart emoji. 40 seconds later, her phone rang. Ira Townsend, her father. The man who'd spent 40 years managing trust accounts and could smell fraud from across a dinner table. Where exactly are you, Vanessa? He asked. Saskia's real name. The one her father used. The one that signaled this wasn't a social call. At the wedding, Dad, she said, Westbrook Country Club. I'm pulling into the Harrington Center right now, Ira said. His voice was calm, clinical, the tone of a man reading numbers that don't add up. Gerald Morrison invited me to celebrate Edith Lockwood tonight. Is there a structural variable I should know about your husband's finances? Silence. Structural variable. Finance language. The kind of question that's really a statement. Saskia didn't answer. Her father chose the other ballroom. Ira Townsend, who'd sat across from her at Thanksgiving dinner and listened to her brag about Clayton's self-reliance, who'd held my gaze for 3 seconds too long when Clayton dismissed my contribution as basic event logistics, who'd spent 40 years learning to recognize when numbers were being manipulated, had been invited to my event by Gerald Morrison, and he'd accepted. He'd redirected his driver from his daughter's wedding to my ballroom. He'd chosen to witness the truth instead of protecting the lie. Dad, Saskia said finally, it's fine, everything's fine. I'll see you tomorrow, Ira said. We'll discuss the structural variables then. He ended the call. Saskia stared at her phone for 30 seconds. Then she opened Instagram and deleted the story. The cropped champagne flute, the blurred empty ballroom, the hashtag of a wedding that never was. Deleted. But screenshots live forever. Gwendolyn's network had captured it within 90 seconds of posting. 3 different people had saved the image. The metadata was preserved. The timestamp was documented. Saskia deleted the story 40 minutes later, but screenshots live forever, and her father was standing in a ballroom across town with every person who matters. At 7:30 p.m., I sit in my suite at the Harrington Hotel, 3 documents spread across the mahogany desk. The first document is a promissory note. Clayton's signature appears at the bottom, bold, confident, dated April 14, 2023. The amount $340,000. The collateral, Saskia's trust fund. The authorization clause, with written consent of trust beneficiary. Saskia never signed. I confirmed that with Ira Townsend 2 weeks ago during a carefully worded lunch where I asked about Clayton's recent financial requests. Ira's pause told me everything. Clayton forged access to his wife's inheritance and his father-in-law doesn't know yet. The second document is a cancellation record from Thornfield Estate. Timestamp 2:47 p.m. November 15, 2023. Client Clayton Farrell. Event executive anniversary celebration. Deposit forfeited $12,000. Total contracted package $500,000. Reason for cancellation. Client requests same-day notification. The third document is a ledger I created myself. 23 names, 19 messages sent between May 24th and May 30th. 19 responses received, 19 contacts who said yes when I asked them to honor their RSVP by attending my celebration at the Harrington instead of Clayton's event at Westbrook. Gerald Morrison, Vincent Russo, Margaret Sutton, Helen Marsh, David Fletcher, Leland Whitfield, Ira Townsend. Every anchor investor Clayton needed for Saskia's fund. Every professional relationship he thought he controlled. Every single person who chose my ballroom over his country club. A network isn't built in 6 months. It's built in 40 years and activated in 19 messages. I close the folder and check my watch. 7:45 p.m. Gwendolyn texted 15 minutes ago. Capacity. Ballroom at max occupancy. Fire marshal consulted. 200 confirmed. 200. Clayton sent invitations to 87 people. I contacted 19 of them directly, strategic contacts, decision makers, anchor relationships. Those 19 became 200. Gerald Morrison brought his business partner and 2 associates. Vincent Russo brought contacts from his private equity network. Margaret Sutton brought senior consultants from her firm. David Fletcher brought managing partners from his litigation practice. Leland Whitfield brought colleagues who remembered the 1998 pro bono clinic I hosted, the one where I didn't charge fees, didn't ask for referrals, simply offered competent legal review to people who needed it. Every yes I earned in 40 years compounded into this room. I stand smooth my navy dress and walk toward the elevator. The Harrington's ballroom occupies the entire second floor, vaulted ceilings, crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Common. I reserved it 8 days ago, the same day I received Clayton's invitation, the same day I understood what he was doing. He wasn't honoring me. He was harvesting my network. The elevator doors open. I step into the hallway and I hear it voices laughter, the low hum of 200 professionals networking in a space designed for elegant gatherings. I pause at the ballroom entrance. Gwendolyn appears beside me, tablet in hand. Capacity, she murmurs. Every RSVP honored. 19 contacts became 200 attendees. Gerald Morrison is holding court near the bar. Vincent Russo just asked about your transition timeline. Margaret Sutton brought a senior partner from her consulting firm. David Fletcher is networking with 3 managing directors I've never seen before. And Ira Townsend, front table, arrived at 7:20. He's been asking about you. I nod. Ira doesn't know about the promissory note yet, but he will. I'm meeting him at 8:30 after Clayton arrives, after Clayton sees this room, after Clayton understands what it means when a network chooses integrity over inheritance. I enter the ballroom. Heads turn. Conversations pause. Then David Fletcher raises his glass. Mrs. Lockwood. He calls out, his voice carrying across the room. I learned why you relocated the celebration. I brought 2 managing partners from our litigation team. Anyone who builds relationships the way you do deserves a room this size. The room applauds. I smile, nod, and begin moving through the crowd, shaking hands, thanking attendees, asking about families and careers and the projects that matter to them. This is what I do. This is what I've always done. Not transactions, relationships. At 8:15 p.m., the ballroom doors open. Clayton stands in the entrance. His tie is loosened, his jacket is wrinkled, his hair, usually precisely styled, falls across his forehead. He looks like a man who spent 6 hours making phone calls that went unanswered, sending texts that were ignored, driving to a country club where he stood alone in an empty ballroom while 200 people gathered 15 minutes away. He sees me across the room, his eyes narrow. I don't move toward him. I wait. He walks through the crowd, shoulders rigid, jaw tight. People step aside, conversations quiet. By the time he reaches me, half the room is watching. What the hell do you think you're doing? His voice is a harsh whisper, controlled but venomous. I meet his gaze. My voice is professional, calm, the same tone I used in 40 years of executive negotiations. I am directing an executive celebration, Clayton. Please step inside. There's champagne at the bar. You stole my event. I relocated my anniversary celebration to a venue that could accommodate the attendance. You're welcome to join us. His hands clench. These people were invited to Westbrook. These people were invited to honor 40 years of professional relationships. The location is secondary to the relationships themselves. Surely you understand that. He is 20 feet from his mother and 1,000 miles from the wedding he planned. Clayton's face reddens. He opens his mouth, closes it, opens it again. He stands frozen in the entrance, staring at the assembled crowd. His anchor investors, his father-in-law, his entire professional future, all of them had consciously chose her room over his performance. He was 20 feet from his mother and 1,000 miles from the success he thought he could steal. See? A champagne glass clinks. The room goes silent. I stand near the dessert table, watching Clayton navigate the crowd with stiff shoulders and clenched jaw. He doesn't approach me again. He doesn't need to. The room's attention has already shifted to the small stage where Leland Whitfield, 71 silver-haired founder of Whitfield Biosystems, rises with a microphone in hand. No one announced him. No one introduced him. He simply stands and 200 professionals stop talking. In 1998, Leland begins his voice calm and measured. I had $8,000 and a pitch deck. I was 46 years old, recently divorced, attempting to launch a biotech startup in a market that demanded 7-figure minimum capital. I had no network, no investors, no venue for my launch event. He pauses. The room leans forward. Edith Lockwood ran my launch event pro bono. She reserved a conference room at the Sheraton. She coordinated catering for 60 people. She printed materials. She managed RSVPs. She did not charge a fee. She did not ask for equity. She simply said, people with good ideas deserve professional support. Leland reaches into his jacket pocket and pulls out a business card. He holds it up, worn edges, faded ink, the unmistakable texture of 25-year-old cardstock. This card is 25 years old, he says. Everything I built started in a room she constructed. Whitfield Biosystems went public in 2007. We employ 412 people. Our market cap is $900 million. I am here because of her. We all are. 10 seconds of silence. Then applause, not polite reception. Applause, but the kind that builds wave after wave until the chandeliers seem to vibrate. I see Gerald Morrison standing. Vincent Russo joins him. Margaret Sutton raises her glass. David Fletcher whistles. Ira Townsend claps slowly, deliberately, his gaze fixed on Clayton. Clayton stands motionless near the bar face, pale, watching his mother receive validation he can never earn. Leland's 1998 event wasn't charity. It was investment, the kind that compounds over decades, the kind that turns $8,000 and a dream into a $900 million empire, and a room full of people who remembered generosity when it mattered most. The applause fades. Conversations resume. I move through the crowd, accepting congratulations, deflecting praise, redirecting attention to the work itself. This is what 40 years builds, not transactions, but trust. At 8:45 p.m., I notice Iris Dalton near the alcove. She's 38, investigative reporter for the Boston Business Journal, sharp-eyed and relentless. She's speaking with Ellis Hampton Clayton's CFO, the man who signed the Westbrook contracts, the man who watched $500,000 evaporate when Clayton canceled 6 hours before start time. I don't approach, I simply watch. Iris gestures toward the ballroom. Mr. Hampton, you're listed as CFO of Farrell Consulting. Are you here supporting Clayton's mother or his business? Ellis shifts his weight. His champagne glass trembles slightly. I'm here because Mrs. Lockwood invited the professional community to celebrate her career. And Farrell Consulting's financial position, Ellis's face crumbles. The question lands like a subpoena. Farrell Consulting faces 90-day liquidation, he says quietly. $500,000 deficit, no path to solvency. We've been operating on bridge loans and credit extensions for 18 months. Iris writes rapidly. And tonight's event at Westbrook. You cannot hide insolvency in a room full of people who built their fortunes on due diligence. Ellis exhales slowly. This was never a celebration. It was a desperate capital rescue masked as a wedding reception. Clayton planned to pitch investors during the reception, convert his mother's anniversary into a fundraising event. He needed $2 million to survive the quarter. And when the venue changed, The investors came here instead, to her event, to honor her career, not to fund his deficit. Iris thanks him and walks toward the exit phone already pressed to her ear. I know where that story will publish tomorrow morning's front page business section above the fold. Consulting firm faces liquidation after failed capital rescue at mother's anniversary event. Clayton will read it over breakfast. So will every investor in this room. At 9:00 p.m., I see Ira Townsend step into the lobby alone. He's holding a photocopy, cream-colored paper crisp edges, unmistakable even from 15 feet away. The promissory note. $340,000. Clayton's signature. My wire transfer confirmation. Dated April 2021. I gave Ira that photocopy 3 hours ago during our brief pre-event meeting. He asked about Clayton's recent financial requests. I handed him documentation instead of speculation. Now he's making a phone call. I don't eavesdrop. I don't need to. I know who he's calling. Gwendolyn appears at my shoulder. Saskia just answered, she murmurs. She's still at Westbrook, alone. I nod. Ira's voice carries slightly through the lobby. Glass Low controlled the tone of a man who built his wealth on identifying fraud before it compounds. Saskia briefed me on the wire transfer from your mother-in-law 2 years ago. Long silence. Then Saskia's voice faint and stammering through the phone. $50,000 family gift for the business. Why? It's a legally binding $340,000 note with 17% interest compounded quarterly. Due date April 2024. Current balance with accrued interest $412,000. I know when a man is defrauding his wife. Silence. $340,000, not $50,000. Saskia believed Clayton borrowed $50,000 as a family gift, a wedding present perhaps, or startup capital from a generous mother-in-law. She signed nothing. She authorized nothing. She didn't know the promissory note existed until her father read the terms aloud over the phone. Clayton lied to his own wife about their foundational debt. He lied about the amount. He lied about the terms. He lied about the interest. He married her while defrauding her about the financial instrument that funded their first year of business. The dial tone hums. Ira stands alone in the lobby staring at the photocopy. She hung up without answering. Some sentences destroy everything the moment they're spoken. Ira returns to the ballroom at 9:10 p.m., the photocopy folded in his jacket pocket. He doesn't speak to Clayton. He doesn't need to. The call to Saskia said everything that required saying. I watch Clayton track his father-in-law's movement across the room, the stiff posture, the averted gaze, the deliberate choice to join Gerald Morrison's conversation circle instead of approaching his son-in-law. Clayton's jaw tightens. He knows. Near the windows, Iris Dalton approaches a man I haven't seen in 4 years. Desmond Pierce, 62, silver-beard architectural designer, Saskia's ex-husband. He's here because I invited him, not for revenge. For context, Iris extends her hand. Mr. Pierce, Iris Dalton, Boston Business Journal. I understand you worked with Saskia Farrell on the Harbor District redesign project. Can you speak to her business ethics? Desmond sets down his champagne. His expression doesn't change, calm, measured, the practiced neutrality of a man who survived a difficult divorce and learned when silence speaks louder than testimony. Her aesthetic work is beautiful, he says. Her corporate ethics are something I have extensive personal experience with. 10 words. No elaboration, no accusation. Just professional observation delivered with surgical precision. Iris pauses, pen hovering. Can you elaborate? I just did. The conversation ends. Desmond walks toward the dessert table. Iris writes rapidly, not because he said something actionable, but because he said exactly enough. A man doesn't reference extensive personal experience with his ex-wife's corporate ethics unless that experience taught him lessons he'll never repeat on record. One sentence, legally bulletproof, professionally devastating. At 9:30 p.m., I walk to the center of the ballroom floor. Gwendolyn sees me moving and quietly signals the sound technician. The background music fades. Conversations taper. 200 people turn toward the woman standing alone beneath the central chandelier. I'm holding 3 documents. I place them on the table in front of me under the light where everyone can see the promissory note with Clayton's signature, the Thornfield cancellation record time-stamped 2:47 p.m., the handwritten ledger tracking 23 names and 19 responses. I don't use a microphone, I don't need one. The room is silent. 2 years ago. I begin my voice calm and clear. My son borrowed $340,000 to save his business. I provided that loan because I believed in supporting family during crisis. The promissory note included standard terms, 17% interest quarterly compounding repayment, due April 2024. I gestured toward the first document. Clayton stands frozen near the bar. 8 months ago, he forgot to invite me to his wedding. Not deliberately, he later explained. An oversight, a scheduling conflict, miscommunication with the venue coordinator. I accepted his apology because I assumed the relationship mattered more than the invitation. I pause. The room leans forward. 6 weeks ago, I received an invitation to tonight's event. Not a wedding, an anniversary celebration, my 40th year in executive recruitment. The invitation listed Thornfield Estate as the venue. It listed 87 professional contacts as guests. It did not mention that the celebration was designed to convert my network into capital for my son's failing consulting firm. When you hold up a promissory note in a room full of financial professionals, there is no spin. Today at 2:47 p.m., Thornfield Estate canceled the venue reservation. I coordinated that cancellation. I then contacted 19 strategic relationships from the guest list, people I've known for decades, people whose careers I supported when they were building their first ventures, and I asked them to honor their RSVP by attending my celebration here at the Harrington instead. I touched the ledger. 19 contacts became 200 attendees. Gerald Morrison brought colleagues. Vincent Russo brought partners. Margaret Sutton brought her consulting team. David Fletcher brought managing directors. Leland Whitfield brought people who remembered the 1998 pro bono clinic I ran when generosity mattered more than equity. The room is utterly silent. I see Ira Townsend watching with something close to approval. I see Ellis Hampton staring at the floor. I see Desmond Pierce nodding slowly. I spent 40 years setting up rooms for other people. I say quietly. Tonight I set one up for myself. 10 seconds of silence. Then Leland Whitfield stands. He doesn't applaud. He simply stands. Acknowledgement, not celebration. Gerald Morrison joins him. Vincent Russo, Margaret Sutton, David Fletcher, Ira Townsend. One by one, 200 professionals rise in a room that no longer belongs to my son. Clayton turns and walks toward the exit. At 10:00 p.m., I stand near the terrace doors watching the courtyard through glass. Clayton paces in freezing November rain phone pressed to his ear, his jacket soaked, his tie undone. He's making calls, damage control justification, the desperate arithmetic of a man trying to salvage relationships after public exposure. His voice carries slightly through the glass. He's on speaker. She pathologically destroyed everything I built. He says, pacing in tight circles. Vindictive, unstable, jealous of my success. I tried to include her. I invited her to the event. She weaponized the invitation oversight into this sabotage. Zero accountability, zero recognition, zero understanding that he created the promissory note, forgot the wedding invitation, designed the capital rescue scheme, and lied to his wife about the debt amount. He stands in freezing rain, blaming the woman standing in warmth. I don't move. I simply watch. Then I see her Saskia standing 10 feet to my left, also watching through the glass. She arrived at 9:45, long after my speech, long after the room stood in acknowledgement. She didn't approach me. She didn't approach Clayton. She simply stood in the lobby staring at the ballroom where 200 people validated the woman her husband tried to exploit. Now she watches him pace in the rain, phone pressed to his ear, still blaming his mother to anyone who will listen. She stands motionless for 30 seconds. Then she turns her back on the courtyard, on the man in the rain, on the voice making excuses, on the marriage built on promissory notes and forgotten invitations, and she walks toward the interior ballroom light. Not to him, not to me, just inside. She walked back inside, not to him, just inside. The article publishes Tuesday morning before I finish my coffee. I sit in my kitchen, the same townhouse I've occupied for 32 years, the same oak table where I reviewed contracts and drafted proposals and built a career one careful decision at a time. My laptop screen glows in the early November light. 7 a.m. Boston Business Journal front page business section. The headline reads, "The Emergency Fundraising Event Pattern Performance Over Substance in Distressed Tech Corridors." Iris Dalton's byline, 4,000 words. Comprehensive, clinical, devastating in its thoroughness. I scroll slowly, reading the analysis I knew was coming but didn't control. The article doesn't mention Clayton by name in the first 8 paragraphs. It opens with industry trends, venture capital contraction bridge, loan dependency, the performative networking events designed to mask insolvency as social celebration, statistical analysis, expert interviews, pattern recognition. Farrell Consulting appears in paragraph 9. Farrell Consulting represents a textbook case, the article states. $500,000 deficit masked by wedding reception capital solicitation, a pattern increasingly common in distressed venture ecosystems. The firm's CFO confirmed liquidation proceedings during an industry event illustrating the breakdown between public performance and private financial reality. Textbook case, pattern, increasingly common. Not villain, not scandal, not even newsworthy as individual failure, just ordinary. I read the paragraph 3 times. Clayton isn't portrayed as fraudulent or malicious or even particularly incompetent. He's described as generic one of dozens of struggling consultants using social capital to delay bankruptcy, part of a larger, systemic trend, unremarkable enough to serve as anonymous illustration for a broader economic phenomenon. The worst professional death isn't scandal, it's irrelevance. The article continues for another 2,000 words. Industry experts discuss emergency fundraising tactics. Bankruptcy attorneys explain insolvency clauses. Venture capitalists describe due diligence red flags. Clayton's name appears twice more, both times as supporting evidence for arguments about industry-wide behavior, not as the story's focus. Iris buried him in context. She didn't destroy his reputation with outrage. She dismissed it with statistics. I close the laptop and pour a second cup of coffee. The kitchen is quiet, no phone calls, no messages, no follow-up inquiries. The article landed exactly as designed, comprehensive industry analysis that happens to include my son's business failure as footnote evidence. I say aloud to the empty kitchen, not a villain, just ordinary. The words echo slightly against the tile backsplash, then silence. I don't feel triumphant, I feel tired. 2 weeks pass. Thanksgiving arrives and departs without contact. I spend the holiday with Gwendolyn and her family roast turkey cranberry sauce conversations about retirement timelines and succession planning. No one mentions Clayton. No one asks about the celebration. The evening is pleasant, professional, deliberately surface level. On December 4th, my phone rings at 2:30 p.m. Helen Marsh. Edith? She says without preamble, Saskia Farrell filed for divorce this morning. Prenup insolvency clause, clean separation. I thought you should know. I thank her and end the call. I sit at my desk for several minutes staring at the leather-bound ledger I've maintained for 40 years. Handwritten entries, tracking contacts, events, outcomes. The careful documentation of a career built on relationships and follow-through. I open to a blank page and write, Deck 2023 SF made her choice. I pause, pen hovering. Saskia didn't leave Clayton because I exposed his fraud. She didn't leave because the article published or the investors withdrew or the business faced liquidation. She left because she stood in the Harrington lobby on November 18th and watched her husband Pace, in freezing rain phone pressed to his ear, blaming his mother for the consequences of his own decisions. She didn't leave because he failed. She left because he blamed. She left because character reveals itself not in crisis, but in who we hold responsible when crisis arrives. I add to the ledger entry, not revenge, just clarity. Then I close the book and return it to the desk drawer. 3 days later, Gwendolyn forwards an email. The subject line reads, Farrell Consulting Voluntary Dissolution Filing. The body contains legal boilerplate asset liquidation creditor notification estimated timeline for Chapter 7 proceedings. Clayton's signature appears at the bottom next to his attorney's. I read it once and file it in the folder labeled Financial Records Promissory Notes. The loan remains outstanding, $412,000 with accrued interest. Due date April 2024. I don't expect repayment. Bankruptcy will discharge most of his obligations, but the promissory note predates the business formation, personal debt, not corporate liability. It will survive the dissolution. I could pursue collection, wage garnishment, asset seizure, legal enforcement of terms Clayton signed willingly. I won't. Not because I forgive him, not because the debt doesn't matter, but because the debt already served its purpose the moment I handed Ira Townsend a photocopy in the Harrington lobby. The promissory note wasn't designed to generate repayment revenue. It was designed to generate truth. Mission accomplished. On December 10th, I receive a handwritten card, no return address, postmarked Boston, inside 4 sentences in elegant script. Mrs. Lockwood, thank you for the introduction to Gerald Morrison. His consulting firm offered me a senior designer position starting January. I accepted. Saskia. No apology, no explanation, no reference to Clayton or the divorce or the celebration or the 40 years of work she watched, validated in a room her husband tried to exploit. Just acknowledgement. I place the card in my desk drawer next to the ledger. Some endings aren't dramatic. They're administrative divorce filings and dissolution notices and thank you cards that say everything by saying almost nothing. I brew another pot of coffee and sit in the kitchen where this started, where the invitation arrived 8 months ago, where I read my son's careful words explaining why I wasn't invited to his wedding. The morning light slants through the window. The oak table feels solid beneath my hands. I didn't set out to destroy Clayton's business or marriage or professional reputation. I set out to protect the network I spent 40 years building from being harvested without acknowledgement. The trust was finalized 6 months before the ballroom confrontation. I sit in Helen Marsh's estate office on December 7th watching her sign the final certification, the Edmund Ellis Foundation, named for my husband, funded with the exact amount Clayton borrowed and never intended to repay. $340,000 restructured from promissory note to perpetual scholarship endowment for non-traditional students pursuing event management careers without 4-year degrees. Helen slides the notarized document across her mahogany desk. The trust is certified. $340,000 in perpetuity for non-traditional students. Edmund would approve. I finalize this in June, I say quietly, 2 weeks after Clayton forgot my birthday. Helen's pen pauses mid-signature. She looks up. You planned the endowment before the wedding disaster. I planned what the money should do, not what Clayton would. The trust was never about revenge. It was about recognition that the loan would never be repaid, that Clayton saw me as resource rather than relationship, that the money could serve a purpose larger than financing a business built on networking harvested from 40 years of someone else's work. I decided the debt's legacy in June. I decided Clayton's consequences in November. The 2 decisions were separate. Helen signs the final page. The foundation accepts applications starting today. First disbursement scheduled for spring semester 2024. You'll review candidates personally. Gwendolyn will forward finalists. I'll approve them. And Clayton's inheritance, restricted to principal only accessible upon my death. No early distribution, no borrowing against future value. The trust protects what remains. Helen nods. She's known me 30 years. She drafted Edmund's estate in 1998. She understands the difference between punishment and boundary setting. I leave her office with the certification in a manila folder. The December air is sharp and cold. I walk 3 blocks to the parking garage, start the car, and drive home in silence. Some endings are administrative. This one feels purposeful. 10 days later, mid-December, my phone rings at 9:47 p.m., unknown number. I almost don't answer. Then I recognize the area code. Boston. I pick up. Mother. Clayton's voice. Hollow, careful, stripped of the confidence I remember from 40 years of watching him grow into someone I no longer recognize. I don't respond immediately. I wait. Can you leverage your Harrington network to assist my firm one last time? Long silence. I hear him breathing. I hear myself breathing. I hear the distance between us measured not in miles, but in the choice he just made, calling me mother, then asking for my network in the same breath. He called asking for his network, not asking how she was. No, Clayton. I'm facing bankruptcy. Creditors are circling. If you could just make 3 introductions, Gerald Morrison, Vincent Russo, Margaret Sutton, I could restructure the debt and sinai finisaqui sintai shawa. No, silence. Then his voice breaks slightly. What do you want from me? I close my eyes. The question isn't angry. It's genuine, the confusion of a man who has spent his entire adult life treating relationships as transactions and cannot comprehend why transactions have stopped working. If you wish to speak to me as a human being, I say, slowly measuring each word, leaving corporate pitches at the gate, the door remains unlocked. I don't understand. I know. The line goes dead. He hangs up. No goodbye, no acknowledgement, just the dial tone humming in my ear. I set the phone on the kitchen counter and stare at it for several minutes. I left the door unlocked. He walked past it, looking for a business opportunity. Some people never see the doors they're offered. 5 days later, December 20th, Gwendolyn emails with the subject line, Foundation First Applications Received, 14 candidates. The trust opened applications on December 7th. Within 13 days, 14 people submitted proposals. Non-traditional students, career changers, hospitality professionals, rebuilding after crisis event, coordinators without degrees trying to formalize skills learned through experience. I read each application carefully. Age ranges from 22 to 51. Backgrounds vary. Single parents, military veterans, recent immigrants, people who left college for financial or family reasons and never returned. Every single one working in event coordination, hospitality management, conference planning. Every single one proving competence without credentials. The 8th application stops me cold. 24 years old. Left university junior year to care for dying mother. Now entry-level hospitality coordinator at a downtown hotel, working full-time while taking night courses in event management. References from her supervisor, a catering director, and a venue manager who calls her the most organized person I've ever worked with, despite having no formal degree. I scroll to the personal statement. 2 paragraphs. Professional, concise, devastating in its clarity. The final line reads, I walked away because a human being needed me more than a piece of paper. I intend to master this room anyway. I read it twice. She chose a dying parent over credentials. She chose correctly. A scholarship is proof that money remembers what people forget. Clayton forgot birthdays and weddings and the woman who built the network he tried to harvest. This 24-year-old woman remembered her mother even when remembering cost her a degree, a timeline, the traditional path everyone said mattered. I open the reply window and type 4 sentences. Approved. First recipient, Edmund Ellis Foundation. Full funding for remaining coursework plus $15,000 annual stipend for living expenses during degree completion. Please confirm acceptance by January 5th. I send the email. Then I sit back in my desk chair and stare at the screen. Edmund built his career on competence, not credentials. He hired people who showed up, worked hard, and cared about outcomes more than optics. He would have approved this candidate in 30 seconds. Some decisions are made before you make them. This one was made the moment I read that line about choosing a human being over a piece of paper. This one was made 40 years ago when Edmund taught me that networks are built on who you help when helping costs something. This one was made in June when I finalized the trust, long before I knew who would apply or why. Some decisions are made before you make them. Winter settles over Boston and life becomes ordinary again. I wake at 6:30. I make coffee in the same French press I've used for 20 years. I walk 3 blocks to the park where Edmund and I used to feed the ducks before he died. I return home, answer emails, review foundation, applications, water the plants on the windowsill. The days are quiet. The urgency is gone. Late December. The scholarship recipient accepted her award on December 22nd. Gwendolyn handled the paperwork. I signed the disbursement authorization. Standard process. Administrative closure. Then Gwendolyn calls on December 28th. The scholarship recipient showed up at orientation yesterday, she says. She brought a notebook, thick green ledger, handwritten, contacts, venues, logistics, follow-up dates. She's already building her black book. I pause coffee cup halfway to my lips. A ledger. Green cover. spiral-bound. Every page filled with names, phone numbers, venue capacities, catering contacts. She's been tracking relationships for 2 years since she started working hospitality. No one taught her, she just knew. She learned before someone taught her. I sit down slowly. 40 years ago, I started my first ledger because I couldn't afford business software and needed a system to track the executive candidates I placed. I wrote names by hand. I logged follow-up dates. I documented every conversation, every referral, every promise made and kept. The black book wasn't strategy, it was survival. It was the only way to prove I remembered people when people forgot me. This 24-year-old woman discovered the same system independently, not because someone taught her credentials matter less than competence, because she lived it. "Where are your thoughts?" Gwendolyn asks gently. I look out the window at the snow falling over Beacon Hill. Some rooms are built so another person can find the doorway. Gwendolyn is quiet for a moment. Then, "She'll do well." Yes, she will. We end the call. I sit in the living room for a long time, holding my coffee, watching the snow accumulate on the windowsill. Edmund used to say that legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what keeps growing after you stop tending it. The foundation will grow. The scholarship will continue. The work goes on. Christmas Eve arrives cold and silent. I wake at dawn, old habit, decades of early meetings and venue confirmations and last-minute crisis management train me to wake before the city does. I walk downstairs to make coffee and notice the envelope, unmarked, white, slid under the front door sometime during the night. I pick it up. No return address, no postage, hand-delivered. Inside a photograph. Aged, creased at the edges, the colors faded to that particular amber tone of pictures, taken in the late 1980s. I recognized the location immediately, the Sheraton Grand Ballroom, 1991, a corporate merger celebration I coordinated for 200 executives. In the foreground, me 39 years old directing setup crew with a clipboard in hand, utterly focused. In the background, barely visible near the service entrance, an 8-year-old boy. Small hands gripping the doorframe, eyes wide watching his mother command a room full of professionals twice her age. "Clayton." I turn the photo over, handwritten note on the back, blue ink, careful script. "I remember thinking you were the most powerful person on earth. I don't know when I forgot that. I am sorry." No signature. He couldn't even sign it. Forgiveness isn't automatic. It's a door you leave unlocked, not one you hold open. I carry the photo to the living room and place it on the mantel beside Edmund's picture. 2 men who loved me in different ways. 2 men who saw me clearly before they stopped looking. I don't call Clayton. I don't send a card. I don't acknowledge receipt. Not yet. Maybe someday. Not yet. The door is unlocked. He knows where I live. If he wants to walk through it as a human being instead of a transaction, the door will still be there. But I won't hold it open. January arrives. Snow gives way to that particular gray cold that settles over New England in the dead of winter. I sit in my living room with tea and the Foundation's first quarterly report, and I think about what this year taught me. And I realize something. I've been talking to you this entire time. You, the person listening to this story, wondering if revenge is justice, wondering if a mother should forgive a son who forgot her, wondering if 40 years of work matters more than one night of retribution. My son believed a diploma defined worth. He believed credentials opened doors. He believed that because he attended the right schools and earned the right degrees and married into the right family, he deserved access to the network I spent 4 decades building one relationship at a time. The night he tried to prove that trapped in an empty country club ballroom while 200 executives gathered in the room I assembled in 6 days, the only credential that mattered was 40 years of showing up. Not showing up to events, showing up for people. Leland Whitfield remembered the 1998 pro bono clinic where I didn't charge fees. Gerald Morrison remembered the referral I made in 2003 that launched his consulting practice. Vincent Russo remembered the investor introduction I facilitated in 2011 when he had credibility but no capital. Margaret Sutton remembered the career advice I gave her in 1996 when she was deciding between corporate law and consulting. They didn't come to my celebration because I have a degree. They came because I remembered them when remembering mattered. What matters more, the degree on your wall or the people who answer when you call? Clayton built a business on borrowed money and harvested contacts. When the money ran out and the contacts chose me, he had nothing left but blame. I built a career on kept promises, and human beings treated like human beings. When my son tried to exploit that network, 200 people stood up in a ballroom and validated 40 years of work he never saw. The rooms that matter most are the ones you build yourself, one contact at a time, one promise, kept one human being remembered. My son forgot me because he stopped seeing people as people. He saw resources, opportunities, networking assets. I built a ballroom in 6 days because 200 professionals remembered I never forgot them. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who thinks credentials matter more than competence, someone who forgets the people who built the room they're standing in, someone who needs to learn that legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you build when no one's watching. The door is unlocked, the scholarship continues, the work goes on. The rooms that matter most are the ones you build yourself. And to you listening to my story, remember, this revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about reclaiming what you built. Looking back, I wonder if I could have chosen a different path. Could I have forgiven Clayton the moment he forgot my wedding invitation? Perhaps. But letting him harvest 40 years of relationships without accountability would have taught him nothing. I don't regret what I did. I regret that I had to do it. Don't make my mistake of waiting too long to set boundaries with the people you love. This grandma revenge wasn't about anger, it was about accountability. Grandma revenge, when done right, isn't really revenge at all. It's showing someone what 40 years of kept promises looks like when they try to exploit them. Maybe you're facing something similar, a family member who takes more than they give someone who forgot the person who built their foundation. I believe God put me through this for a reason, to show that protecting your legacy isn't selfish, it's necessary. Sometimes the hardest lessons are the ones we teach the people we love most. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family? What would you have done? Please share this with someone who needs it and subscribe to Her Family Revenge for more stories about family accountability and the strength it takes to stand up for yourself. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything. One final reminder, this story includes fictional elements for storytelling and reflection. Any resemblance to real people is coincidental. What matters most is the message.